You're watching Beyond Markets. Welcome, I'm Esther Awoni. Many thanks for joining us. On today's show, ahead of the 2019 Annual Business Law Conference, the Nigerian Bar Association section on business law will join me to discuss how to drive inclusive growth, investment and employment in Nigeria. As always, you can join the conversation with the hashtag Beyond Markets. You can also follow my Twitter handle too, at Esther O. Awoni. Now, this year's theme for the Nigerian Bar Association section on business law's annual conference focuses on practical solutions for Nigeria to achieve inclusive growth, attracting investment and creating employment solutions for the youth. Adeoye Adefulu, chairman of the Conference Planning Committee, and Ozofu Ogiemudia, the vice chair of the Conference Planning Committee, joined me today for this discussion. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you on today's show.
Great to be here.
So these are issues that we talk about all the time in the country: creating employment for Nigeria's teeming youth, unlocking more private sector investments, and of course, overall economic growth for the country. Now, but we're at a time when, right now, there's a call for more private sector investment for economic growth to be led by the private sector. Led by the private sector, but also enabled by the public sector, hence creating that enabling business environment on that side of things. Let me start with you, Adeoye. Policy direction, we're still waiting for the president's cabinet. Economies that I have spoken to the last couple of weeks have said, look, even the market is waiting for that policy direction. But in the meantime, I mean, life goes on, as it were. But let's hear your thoughts, your perspective on policy direction and how we can now take a lead from there.
Okay. Look, so it is critical for investment to make sure that we have very clear guidance as to where the government is going. And I think that's part of the challenge that we had it's difficult to say the previous administration because it's the same one, but it's part of the challenge that we've had. We've had the government talking about, and in many parts of the government driving, enabling business environment. But on the other hand, we've seen some parts of the government which seem to be, I wouldn't say intent on driving investment away, but they have taken certain actions which suggest which do not give the market comfort that investment is welcome. One of the questions that we get continuously asked as lawyers when people are looking to invest in Nigeria is, what happens when we become successful? Are we going to get the treatment that some of the more successful companies in the market have been getting? And, so those are some of the things that we do need to be clear that as a government, as an administration, what we want to do is to drive investment and create that environment. And that environment is not just about foreign investment. I think foreign investment is important, but if local investors are even scared about investing in your economy, that's a really big challenge. So we need to work to promote investment or promote enabling environment for investment for local investors as well as foreign investors.
All right, Ozofu, let me bring you in here. Regardless of what the policy direction is, one thing is clear: the economy should be private sector driven, while also public sector enabled, as it were. But what would you say is a pulse, the feeling of the business community? From time to time we talk about business confidence, how confident the business community is in other policies of government, or what happens when they run into, your lawyers, when we run into litigation or issues that have to do with the law, what kind of treatment will they get? So just help us understand from your perspective, in your experience, what you deal with every day, the pulse of the business community. What are they thinking?
Okay, so I think part of the challenge which Adeoye had picked up on was we need the government not just to talk about encouraging investment, but for the investors to feel that they're being encouraged. So sometimes we have a delay, maybe lack of communication from the government. So for instance, at the end of January, we got a new Competition and Consumer Protection Act that was passed by the president. And then for several weeks, going on to months, there was just nothing, no announcement as to what we were supposed to do, how we could operate within the new framework of a Competition Act. This is the first Competition Act in this country. We've never had a competition regulator. That role had been played by the Securities and Exchange Commission. So it was a new era for us. There's a new regulator. A new board should be constituted. It hasn't been. Eventually, the regulator came out with an announcement for an interim arrangement, but there's still some uncertainty. Okay. And so we have a new act. We're operating under the old rules because there are no new rules. Those are the sort of things. That uncertainty is really what scares investors. They need to know, what are the rules that apply to my transaction. They want to know when they start. They don't want to know as they go along. They want to plan, and that helps them determine whether they would even go ahead with the deal at all. And so, for instance, we also have the Companies and Allied Matters bill. It's a 29-year-old act, our Companies Act, so it sets the framework for companies in Nigeria. The bill has been passed by the last National Assembly. It only needs the President's assent. You can only wait so long to be assented to. So that's one other thing that everybody is waiting for. So I think we don't always get the sense that the government understands time is of the essence in the business environment. People can't wait just forever. They need to know. They need certainty, and they need it now. So we would like to see the government more sensitive about making the changes they talk about, and then ensuring that they are conscious of time and they do things.
It's interesting you mentioned especially the CAMA, because usually, from time to time I do get the head of the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, PEBEC, and keep talking about what they're doing with the ease of doing business, all the action points and all the achievements that they achieve from from month to month or from quarter to quarter, and it would appear that they're covering quite a significant amount of ground. But I'm just thinking, where is Adeoye to you now? Is there a disconnect, or should they be moving at a faster pace, or should they expand their scope in terms of how they're making the business environment more conducive for the private sector? Because they are actually doing some work. Yeah. I've seen the work that they're doing actually.
Look, PEBEC, as SBL, we've worked with PEBEC since PEBEC was founded. And we've played that support role for PEBEC, and we believe very much in what PEBEC is doing and in the steps that they've taken. But, all of the challenges that businesses face cannot be solved by one entity. And you also have to realize that PEBEC is really a presidential creation. It's not backed by statute. And so what that does, and I think this is an important point, is that its relationships with other regulators is a little bit complex. It's not in a position to lord what it wants to achieve over them. It's in a persuasive relationship, and therefore sometimes some people will be persuaded, and we've seen changes in many organizations. The Corporate Affairs Commission is one that PEBEC always goes on about. We've seen a number of changes there as a result of PEBEC, and they've worked together. And there are a few other organizations that are doing that. But if an organization which is created by statute and has its own powers, etc., doesn't want to actually carry out a particular action, then they, short of, in quote, reporting that person. Or
because I know they carry the weight of the office of the vice president. I suppose that's what they will. That's the will. But again,
to be honest, in my view, I don't think that's sufficient. Actually, I think that we need to have, for lack of a better phrase, a sort of super regulator that actually has the mandate to check. And this is not unusual, actually. You have that in different jurisdictions across the world. You've got that office in the UK. You've got a similar office in the US that does this. And that regulator, the position is to make sure that regulators follow certain rules. So, for example, if you're going to make an announcement to increase anything, you've given that a period of time. You've given people time to consult, and decisions are not just handed out overnight. And having somebody that sort of guides people or guides regulators and so on, that investors or consumers can say, hey, this regulator is not acting in accordance with the rules that have been laid down. And those rules actually do need to be laid down, because what we have in our jurisprudence, or in our laws rather, we have different regulators with their different laws giving them different powers and different sort of controls. And what happens is that there is some inconsistency. So you have like the Electric Power Sector Reform Act, which is quite clear on the role of the regulator and what the regulators can do, similarly with the NCC Act. But you have other legislation that is kind of open as to what role the regulator can play.
So you
how
think this confuses private sector players or makes life more difficult for them?
We think it can be made better. And clearly a system to make it better is this is not rocket science. It's used in other jurisdictions across the world.
Okay, Ozofu, is that your perspective too?
Yes, just to add that, I think, by having streamlining how operators relate with market participants, it will help to keep regulators accountable. I think one thing that we have, a way that regulators behave in this jurisdiction is sort of like their lords. They don't always see themselves as an enabling authority, like actually there to provide a service that will enable the participants in the market. And I think that if they adopt that sort of mindset, then it's not about control and sanctions and all that, but it's all about how do we help you do your business.
Okay, I must thank you for your time so far. We're going to take a short break at this point, and we'll come back and pick up from where we left off. I've been speaking to Adeoye Adefulu. He's the chairman of the Conference Planning Committee, and Ozofu Ogiemudia, vice chair of the Conference Planning Committee of the Nigerian Bar Association. We'll continue with our discussion right after the break. To join us again. If you're just joining us, Adeoye Adefulu, chairman of the Conference Planning Committee, and Ozofu Ogiemudia, vice chair of the Conference Planning Committee of the NBA, are with me today, and we're discussing ways to drive inclusive growth, investment, and employment in Nigeria, the theme of this year's NBA section on business laws annual conference. Thank you for your time so far. Let's move on. We've talked about, the private sector, the role of the private sector. We've talked about, direction from the fiscal authorities. We've talked about the investment climate and making the business environment more conducive for, to attract more investment. Let's talk about growth now, economic growth, just very briefly. Our key commodity is oil. And for this government to drive economic growth, they've said that it's going to be anchored on diversifying the economy. Yeah. But then there's been, even while we're diversifying the economy, there's been a lot of conversation around how about adding value to the key export commodity itself, oil. Yeah. We import refined products, oil or crude or refined products, but we export it in its raw form. So people have been asking, why not build a value chain around that? Why not have those byproducts here in the country and make more money and create more jobs? Okay.
Look, I think that's important, and it is one of the things that we're actually talking about at our conference. Okay. And to be fair to the government, I think it's a central focus for them. We need to create refineries in Nigeria. I know that Dangote refinery is already sort of in process, but beyond that, we need the existing refineries to either work or for new refineries to be developed around that. But there's also gas-based industries. But a number of these things, for these things to work, pricing is a key element. So if I'm going to build a refinery, I want to make sure that when I am selling to the market, that I can sell my refined products to the market at cost plus, enough to be able to make a profit. And similarly with the gas-based industries, the concerns for producers would be that when they are selling gas and they are developing the pipelines, etc., that are required to actually transport the gas to the right markets, that at the end of the day, they're able to realize the value from the gas that they have produced and they have transported to the market. And those are critical elements, and those are some of the things we will certainly be discussing at the conference. And we have a number of people who are experts in this sector talking about that issue. And
I'm really hoping that for some very, actionable solutions or points that, that can come up from that conversation, because, it's been a long drawn, conversation about how to add value to, our crude oil, our main source. Ozofu, let's quickly talk about employment. At the heart of this administration's, economic goal is jobs. We've heard so many numbers, millions created since 2015, but questions have been asked about what are these jobs that are being created, what is the value, the quality of the jobs that have been created. But in terms of, from this conference, what you're hoping, in terms of what your guests will say, the key outcomes on solutions to job creation, could you just share some of those points, what you're hoping for?
So for instance, one of our sections is going to be talking about health, security, and education, things that we believe we need to address. So employment, improving employment is a broad goal, but there are little things that feed into it. People are more employable if they are educated. We've heard different numbers, but we know that we see young people on the streets every day, toddlers and teenagers, young people that some don't even finish primary school. It's rampant. So we need a focus on improving our human capital, making our people more employable, and that empowers them to get better jobs, earn a better living, create jobs, think beyond, where we currently are thinking. So that's one thing we want to focus on. We're also thinking about security, the security situation in Nigeria. Are people safe? Are people safe to go and look for jobs? Are they safe to pursue their dreams? It's important because, we know what's happening in some states in the north, and the people in the IGP camps. How are they empowered, and how can they join the job market again? Are they secure enough to do that?
On the point of education, from an education standpoint, and that's a very good point you made, but my question is, should we really expect to see a difference if we do not significantly increase allocations to education, the human capital, side of the budget, education and health?
Yes.
If we do not have an educated or a healthy population, that also affects jobs in the future, those who are going to be having these jobs. But I know that there are competing needs every year in annual budgets. Many of them, if you look across the African continent, they've stalled. Debt is rising, and there simply isn't money to fund these budgets. Domestic revenue mobilization is a challenge. Just look at our tax to GDP ratio. So back to my question, should we really expect that to change if we're not investing enough in education or human capital?
I think that, our conference is beyond rhetoric. We really want to emphasize that we have to go beyond talking and do something. We need to allocate more to education. It has to be a focus. We have the governor of Lagos State, the new governor, as one of our speakers at the dinner. State governments are responsible for primary education. We need to see governors prioritize this in their budgets. We recognize that, just saying education, we have to go beyond that. There has to be a conscious government effort if we really want to drive growth, development.
I think we are supposed to be circling back to the private sector, because if government can come and throw up his hands and say, look, we simply do not have the cash to do this. How about the private sector step in? Even, education, human capital development, and that will be a valid point. Okay,
so I think there are many things that we need to think about. Money is important, and with regards to money, we need to, I would say, reprioritize. So what is the government spending money on now, and what should it be spending money on? So we need to think about that. That's very important. We think that things like health, things like security, things like education, those are things that are really primary responsibilities of the government. But where is it investing? Are there other areas that it should not be investing in, that it's investing in? And those monies could be channeled into health, security, and education. I think that's important. The second thing that I think is also important, particularly with regards to education, is that it's not just about money. It's about innovation, it's about ideas, and looking for alternatives and solutions to help to leapfrog. And there are a number of projects that we've seen across the world that have been able to change the direction, that have been able to improve the quality of education, improve the quality of teaching, improve the quality of delivery to the students. And some of those things need to be looked at, harnessed, and utilized within the context of Nigeria. So we want investment, so prioritize government investments into health, security, and education, but we also want you to innovate and to adopt innovative solutions from different jurisdictions across the world.
Now, Ozofu, would you say that that is happening? I mean, I've lost kind of the number of times I've talked about, innovation, technology coming to change, and giving us that opportunity to leapfrog, in especially in key sectors, ICT, for instance, where we can, harness and just build, encourages the young, startups that are coming up and changing the ecosystem. But would you say that impact on the ground, is it encouraging? Let me use that word.
I think certainly in the private sector, so like you rightly said, in most of the innovation we're seeing in terms of training of teachers and introduction of technology to students, we see it more in the private sector. What that means is it's the students that can afford to be in private education that get that access, and a significant number of the Nigerian population is in public education. So while we see the impact that's being made in private schools and by private institutions training teachers, we also need to realize that the bulk of the Nigerian population might not have access to this because you have to pay for it. And if we make education a priority, then we need to make sure it's available regardless of your income and your social your social class. It needs to be, people need to be able to access it. There will always be education that you have to pay a premium for. But we think basic ICT should be part of basic education right now in all our schools.
I know it's funny because we have some states where, just getting the kids to go to primary school is a challenge. And, that brings me back to, because I have this conversation all the time with especially analysts where we talk about some states, some people, excuse me, in the economic bracket get left behind because they do not have the opportunity, they don't have the education. So that automatically excludes them from certain opportunities. So sometimes when we talk about Nigeria economic growth, some states are actually, in quote, excluded because they find themselves onlookers. They're not part of the economic growth and inclusion that's going on.
Yeah. Look, this is really important. And what we want for Nigeria is that in spite of your social class, in spite of the circumstances of your birth, you have, at the very least, the opportunity to be able to move levels very quickly. Personal experience, a number of us, our dads came from the villages, but through education, they were able to advance themselves and right now are in the higher levels of society strata. The question is, if this circumstance is repeated now, are there people that are able to leapfrog and move into levels, and that is increasingly getting more and more difficult. We need to be able to create, so if you went to a public school, then if you went to a federal government college or what, you met everybody at different levels of society, but you also were able to move to the next level. So we want that kind of achievement to be returned into our system, and that's what we're looking for.
I think we need to round this up. We have about 2 minutes left. Outcomes, we talked about this earlier, outcomes of the conference, and you said that you wanted to be beyond rhetoric, beyond talking. Maybe helping to guide policy. What can you tell us from, is this the first conference? No? There's been others.
This is the 13th.
Would you say that there's been actually some impact, that this conference, the outcomes, the speakers, some of the policy recommendations are actually impacting on government policy?
Yes, so like Adeoye said, the SBL generally, even outside the conference, we work we work closely with PEBEC. Okay. We worked with the last National Assembly, so we work with regulators sometimes to draft or refine regulation, or to just have a discussion with them and make them sensitive to what's in the market. We've helped the National Assembly with drafting of laws. Adeoye worked on the Petroleum Industry
and Governance Bill.
Governance Bill. I worked on the Companies and Allied Matters Act. So we have that partnership. It's ongoing. We expect, even though this is a new administration, there will be changes. Even within the regulator, we might see some changes, but we are available and we are very willing to continue to work with government and enhance the framework of our market.
You're going to have to leave there. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on today's
show.
Thank you.
Been great.
Thank you for being here. I've been speaking to Adeoye Adefulu. He's the chairman of the Conference Planning Committee, and Ozofu Ogiemudia, vice chair of the Conference Planning Committee of the NBA. Well, that's our show for today. Thank you so much for being a part of it. I'm Esther Awuni. Bye for now.